fears. I have this fear that when I go to apartment owners, they're going to be like, "Well, what you do is brilliant. I want to do it myself." Can you help me with that fear because that's keeping me from contacting a lot of peers that have some of my friends have 500 apartments that they own as a syndicator. Um, they just continued with that instead of I went into Airbnb and
Mm.
they're doing really well, a lot of them. And
Well, so certain
so
certain owners are scrappy and entrepreneurial. Some are. So some like the idea. But the ones that like the idea probably already know about the idea and are already pursuing it. So currently, because Airbnb is not new, the apartment complexes that you approach that do not already have their own Airbnb like thing in place, most likely they don't plan on doing it themselves because landlords typically tend to want more passive income. So single family homeowners buy a home to get a monthly rent check. They're not trying to be customer service. They're not trying to manage housekeepers. They're not trying to constantly deal with guests that are coming in and out and all that activity and being available after midnight every night. People buy property because it's a good, passive, easygoing way to build wealth. The multifamily apartment complex is the same. An owner of a 240 unit apartment complex who's already busy, right? Because he's already got his whole path, and he got that far because he's motivated, right? So he didn't get his 240 unit building by being lazy. He's probably doing some other stuff still. He's probably got other plans. And he's just trying to get his problems solved so he can continue on his path. So, with that said, by you introducing your rental arbitrage business and becoming an arbitrage partner, by doing that, you are opening up more room for them to grow, to do more of what they are good at. And as long as they can trust you to be good at this half of the business, that equates to leases for them. And the more leases you give them, as far as business, the more buildings that they can buy. And this is how you would present that
and that's
to.
exactly what motivates these type of people. Buying
Yeah.
doors, telling people how many doors they own, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
that's
so you're helping
it.
them buy more doors. These
Yeah.
landlords, they don't want the active daily grind of a short-term rental business. They would not be in real estate owning property if they liked busy work, right? But they're still busy because people can't help but to be busy. They just don't like the idea of dealing with people that often.
Hmm.
So you should be fine. I wouldn't worry about it. And of course, if somebody starts to get a little bit froggy, thinking they can do it on their own, um, be my guest and call me in 3 months after you decide you don't want to do it because it is not as easy as it looks. That's the truth. It's running an Airbnb business is not just an easy thing. Like you have to manage staff. I mean, in some buildings, like property management companies, they're good at managing housekeepers and stuff, but their contract with the building is just to manage occupancy. They don't have a contract with the owner to also do short-term rentals. And a lot of property management companies, their business model is so actually different from short-term rentals that it doesn't make sense for them to manage the property and then get into short-term rentals. I mean, it is a jump that they could do, but their business models are still just too separate. Selling leases and managing tenant like maintenance and stuff is only a fraction of like the complexity of running a short-term rental business with multiple channels and pricing strategy and having to make all these decisions on your own. The property management company, they take what the owner wants and they find out what the rental market is and then they price for the rental market, and it's much more like steady. So even property management companies, I don't think you have to worry about telling them about your business model and then they go to the owner and say, no, let us do this. This is genius.
They don't
They
think
don't,
that way. They
no,
don't. Yeah,
yeah.
you're
So
right.
don't worry.
Okay. And then my stats, I just called, I just think I contacted four this week. I have one appointment today, but the stats I want to hit next week is 15, and then I want to have two appointments next week. So that's what I'm committing
Cool.
to. Yeah.
Nice.
And then
Nice.
lastly, I really want to get your opinion on markets to consider for out of state. As you know, I live in Orange County, California, near
Mhm.
LA. Do you know of any ones that would be like in Nevada, Northern California,
Um,
Arizona?
I would say There, like, yeah, Mesa probably might be the better one in the Arizona, Scottsdale, Phoenix area. So Mesa, Arizona is probably where my intuition would take me, and I do my market research in Mesa first. Salt Lake City, I've done the numbers on Salt Lake City. I like Salt Lake City. I think B cities, like B size, not your majors, not Chicago, New York, Dallas, Miami, not your majors, but the medium sized cities like Charlotte, North Carolina, Raleigh, Birmingham, Alabama, Salt Lake City, those types of cities like Boise, those cities they are less likely to have major presence from big players because the big players all went for the major cities because they could scale more, right? And these well-funded short-term rental companies want to be tech businesses and they want to be billion-dollar organizations. So they want to be in London, New York, Shanghai, Sydney, Australia, LA, San Francisco. That's where they want to be. They don't want to be in Boise, Idaho, because it's harder to find staff maybe. Especially because they all third-party their staff. A lot of companies contract out their housekeepers, so it's harder to find good quality, consistent third-party housekeeping companies. It's basically all supply chain. So they don't want to play around in Boise, Idaho, or Salt Lake City as often because they feel like there's less traffic. But because there's less traffic, there's also less supply, hotels included, which means you have less inherent competition. And if you do a better job than the people in those cities, you rise to the top. And so bigger companies or bigger cities like Dallas or New York, Chicago, you have to deal with some really good operators. So those B-class cities, any of them that are like 1.5 million to 600,000 population probably would be the ones that I would go for.
Okay. AirDNA produced a report that's really extensive that talked about all the cities in the country. So I have to digest it and look at it, but it looks really good.
Yeah, so it's not just what the numbers are, right? But it's how you fit into the competitive heat within those numbers, right? So you might have two cities. City A, top end performance, 140 a night on a one bedroom, bottom end 90, right? But then there's another city where top end performance is 130 per night and bottom is like 75. But the city where the top end was 140, the level of the level of elegance from the operators there and the amount of funding that they have is pristine. And so your likelihood of coming in the top 25th percentile as far as an Airbnb host is less as likely in a more competitive market. So even though some cities where the comps look a little lower, you would do better where you are the big fish, where you are the most elegant and most, mature and well-built business in the yard. You would do better. You'd actually make more money, even though the top end prices are a little bit lower in that city because somebody else is already taking the upper tier income. You know what I mean? It's going to be harder to break up into that bracket if you're competing with somebody like Sonder, who has 400 doors in Philadelphia or something. You're trying to break into Sonder's market. The pie is split.
Wow. They have 400 doors in certain markets.
Oh, they've got over 1,000 in Philadelphia. I was throwing out an arbitrary number. They've got 4,500 or 5,000 doors right now. They actually abandoned a couple deals in Philadelphia. So they were actually launching 1,000 new doors and they dropped a couple. So, and Sonder also has some crazy stuff in their leases. They do these recession triggers that if the Dow Jones drops 700 points, they get a free month of rent. And they steamrolled some landlords in Philadelphia with their recession triggers because people didn't think that they were actually going to happen. And now these landlords are bailing on these master leases and trying to sue Sonder for money over these things. So Sonder has lost deals because they did too good of a job negotiating with these landlords.
Yeah, that's all it takes is 1 month of not paying me because there's a trick in your lease, and I'm not going to trust you. It's kind of short-sighted.
Yeah. So heavy communication is important there. You really have to walk a landlord hand in hand and say, the reason why we put this recession trigger in here is because the assumption is if this recession trigger happens, both you and I will be in a really hard spot that we want to weather together. We want to get through this together. So this is a contingent where we pay less rent, but you still have a tenant. And we, of course, are still committed to carrying your lease through maturity. But in this highly unlikely but highly dangerous situation where the economy souffles, we can both be on life support and get through it together rather than us failing on you and it breaking and then you getting no money, right? So that's kind of how you would pitch that to a landlord on a longer
Yeah.
deal. Because a 5-year long lease, even though there's more security, arguably than a 1-year long lease. Now the problem is like, well, I may not see the whole 5 years if you go out of business within that 5 years. So if you have to introduce this later in the agreement or in your negotiation. Once they really have confidence in you as a business, you can then say, hey, this is highly unlikely, but let's still have that conversation. And you can work in recession triggers that way, but it has to be later on.
Okay.
Yeah, this was fun. This was a fun workshop. This is great. I feel like we covered we were able to condense a lot of the closers crash course stuff into anecdotes in a half an hour. So I hope all of you guys on the call enjoyed listening to that. Do any of you have, Jordan, Chris, Mark, any of you guys have any pressing stuff you want to ask? Any questions you got?
Yes, I have a question real quick. So do you actually have like your businesses like separate, like here this and they're in Philadelphia? Do you have them under two separate LLCs, or do you
I don't do it by region. It's not a bad idea though. Not a bad idea.
right?
But I don't do it by region. So I've got two separate LLCs that both apply for leases in tandem. Then I've got a separate management company that gets paid to do repairs and gets paid to do all the ops. So that way we can invoice ourselves if somebody breaks something and we need to come up with a receipt or an invoice. We actually have the two LLC thing that allows us to generate invoices. So that's 3 businesses right there.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, so it's
that
two
invoice
LLCs,
is fun.
and then it's one manager company. So the manager company is a LLC in itself, right?
Exactly right. Now, the reason why we do that is because let's say we've got a landlord that goes bonkers, right? Which has happened to us actually. The issue with like a landlord, like let's say they try to like get money out of you. Like one tried to revoke a lease concession. Like they were giving us the 2nd month of rent for free and then the 13th month for free. When the 2nd month came on 4 of our 5 leases, they gave us the 2nd month for free on the first lease, but not on the 4th, like the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. He tried to sue us for that money, even though it was in our lease concession agreement that we would get those for free. Well, he changed management companies. The leases on his side got lost. The lease concessions got lost, so the paperwork was gone. And then he had Greystar come in as a new management company, told them we were defaulting on rent and told them to evict us. So the eviction process was started, but it got abandoned, thankfully, but the eviction process was still started. Now, at that point in time, if Greystar is actively trying to evict you, you can't apply for any other Greystar buildings. It'll show up worldwide that Greystar is currently trying to evict you from a property, and you cannot apply to any of them. Your deal will get shut down. So having 2 LLCs allows you to navigate time-sensitive problems. Like if you're wrapped up in a legal tussle where you've got to like negotiate with a landlord and something's on the record with the management company that you can resolve, but until it gets resolved, you look like the guilty party. Having to lease 2 LLCs allows you to continue to acquire properties as you wish without having to worry about like that snag. And the last thing you want is to actually have a problem with your business where you legitimately get sued and legitimately get evicted and have bad stuff on your record, and then it blow out that LLC. And if that's the only LLC that you owned, the only one that you were maturing for 4 years, you have to hit that reset button on a new LLC to try to get, enough like street cred. So owning multiple LLCs just so they can be old enough is also important as well as like a safety net.